Deep within a modern laboratory, a scientist guides a microscopic tool with breathtaking precision, snipping and editing the very code of life itself. This is CRISPR, one of the most revolutionary technologies humanity has ever created, a power that feels almost godlike in its ability to reshape biology. But what if this staggering leap forward wasn't just a product of our modern genius? What if the idea, the very concept of rewriting life, was envisioned thousands of years ago, not in a sterile lab, but around crackling fires under the vast, starry skies of Scandinavia? Imagine for a moment the Vikings, those legendary explorers and storytellers, spinning tales of world trees, magical apples, and the weaving of fate itself. We've long dismissed these myths as simple stories of gods and monsters, fantastical narratives from a bygone era. But what if we've been reading them all wrong? What if Norse mythology was never just about the past, but a cryptic, astonishingly accurate prediction of the future? This is not just a fanciful thought experiment. It's a journey into the heart of human imagination, a quest to uncover whether our deepest myths are merely stories or something far more profound. We are about to explore the incredible parallels between the ancient Norse concept of Yggdrasil, the great world tree that connects all realms of existence, and the modern genetic code that connects all life on Earth. We'll delve into sagas that speak of altering one's destiny and compare them to scientists altering DNA sequences. This is about more than just coincidence. It's about the timeless human desire to master our own nature, a thread that stretches from the Viking Age directly into our 21st century laboratories. So join me as we embark on an exploration that will challenge everything you thought you knew about ancient legends and modern science. We are going to connect the dots between the mystical and the molecular, between the prophetic visions of the Eddas and the precise algorithms of gene editing. By the end of this journey, you will see these ancient stories in a completely new light, not as mere folklore, but as a potential blueprint for a future the Norse seers could only dream of. The clues have been hidden in plain sight for centuries, waiting for us to finally understand their true meaning. Let's begin. To truly grasp the staggering parallels between ancient belief and modern biology, we must first understand the Norse conception of the cosmos. It was not a random collection of worlds, but a meticulously ordered, living system bound together by a single, magnificent entity. At the very center of everything stood Yggdrasil, the immense and eternal world ash tree. This was not merely a symbol. To the Norse, it was the literal backbone of reality, an axis mundi connecting the 9 distinct realms, from the heavenly home of the gods in Asgard to the chilly underworld of Hell. Every part of the universe was sustained by this tree. Its roots delved deep into the wells of fate and wisdom, while its highest branches scraped the heavens, cradling the eagle and the hawk. Creatures like the serpent Nidhogg gnawed at its roots, and the deer fed on its leaves, representing a constant cycle of decay and renewal, a system in perpetual dynamic balance. Now hold that image in your mind, a vast, intricate network of connections, a central structure from which all life and existence emanates. Does that not sound hauntingly familiar? Our modern understanding of biology has revealed its own version of Yggdrasil, one that exists within every single cell of every living thing on this planet. This is the double helix of DNA, the molecule of deoxyribonucleic acid. Think of it as our biological world tree. Its twisting, ladder-like structure is a perfect mirror to the great roots and branches of Yggdrasil, a physical representation of interconnectedness. Just as the world tree linked the gods, the giants, and humanity, our DNA links every species on Earth, from the smallest bacterium to the largest blue whale. We all share the same fundamental genetic language, the same 4-letter code that writes the story of life. This connection goes even deeper when we consider the relationships between species. The Norse saw the different realms as distinct but connected through the tree's structure. Alfheim, the world of the light elves, was connected to Midgard, the world of humans, just as Vanaheim, home of another godly tribe, was linked to Asgard. In our genetic world tree, we see the exact same principle. By comparing DNA sequences, scientists can trace the branches of evolution, literally mapping out how all life is related. The genetic difference between a human and a chimpanzee is a shorter branch on the same tree, while the distance to a blade of grass is a much longer branch, but we are all ultimately connected to the same trunk, the same origin point. The concept of a universal tree of life is not just a metaphor in biology, it is a scientific model, and it is astonishing how precisely it echoes the Norse vision of Yggdrasil binding all creation together. It's as if the ancient skalds, in their poetic attempt to describe the cosmos, inadvertently described the very blueprint of biology itself. But if Yggdrasil is the structure, then what is the force that writes upon it? Who dictates the patterns of life and destiny? In the Norse worldview, this immense responsibility fell to three powerful, enigmatic figures known as the Norns. More than just goddesses, they were the master weavers of reality itself. Their names were Ørd, Verdandi, and Skuld, representing what was, what is, and what shall be. They resided at the base of the world tree at the Ørdabrunna, the Well of Fate. It was here that they performed their sacred, never-ending task. They drew water from the well and mixed it with sacred clay to care for Yggdrasil's roots, preventing it from decay. But most importantly, they carved runes into wood and wove the threads of fate for every single being, from the highest god Odin down to the most humble human. Their weaving determined the length of a life, the triumphs, the tragedies, the very destiny of all creation. Now let's pause and consider this process. The Norns weren't just passive observers, they were active programmers. They were manipulating a fundamental substrate, the threads of fate, to create and alter outcomes. They accessed a wellspring of ancient wisdom, the Ørdabrunna, which held the knowledge of all that had ever happened. This is a stunningly accurate metaphor for the work being done in genetics labs today. Our modern Norns are the geneticists and molecular biologists. Instead of a well of water, they draw from the wellspring of data, the human genome, the complete source code of a human being. And instead of carving runes into wood, they are writing and editing code using the 4 letters of the genetic alphabet, A, T, C, and G. The parallels become even more precise when we look at the tools. The Norns used their knowledge to alter destiny, to change the course of what was pre-written. Today, CRISPR technology acts as their mystical loom. This gene editing tool allows scientists to find a specific sequence in the vast tapestry of DNA, the what was or ørd, and make a precise change to it in the present moment, the what is or verdandi, which then forever alters the future outcome, the what shall be or skuld. It is a direct intervention in the thread of life, just as the Norns would intercede in the fate of a god or a hero. We are, in a very real sense, learning to weave the threads of our own biological destiny, moving from being passive subjects of our genetics to active authors. The ancient seers envisioned a time when the secrets of the Well of Fate could be understood and utilized, and that time, against all odds, is now. This brings us to the very mechanics of fate itself in the Norse world, a system governed by 2 profound and interlinked concepts, ørlög and wyrd. To truly appreciate how these ancient ideas mirror our modern understanding of genetics, we need to unpack their meanings. Ørlög, pronounced roughly as ørlög, was the foundational layer. Think of it as the primal, cosmic law, the original layers of fate that were laid down at the very beginning of time. It was the base code of the universe, the fundamental conditions and unbreakable rules that everything else was built upon. This is not so different from the basic genetic programming inherent in a species. The fact that a human embryo will develop into a human and not a frog, governed by the immutable laws of biology written into our DNA. Wyrd, from which we get the modern word weird, was the active, unfolding manifestation of that foundational code. If ørlög was the original source script, wyrd was the living story being written from it moment by moment. It was your personal destiny, the sum total of your actions and their consequences, constantly being woven into the larger tapestry. The crucial point here is that while ørlög set the stage, wyrd was not seen as entirely unchangeable. The actions of gods, heroes, and even ordinary people could influence its weaving. A brave deed could alter one's wyrd, just as a cowardly one could seal a terrible fate. This reveals a Norse understanding of destiny that was dynamic, not static, a system with a fixed starting point but a flexible future. Now, let's hold these two concepts, ørlög and wyrd, up against our biological reality. Our ørlög is our genetic destiny. It is the genome we are born with, the set of instructions inherited from our parents that predisposes us to everything from our height and eye color to our potential risk for certain diseases. This is our biological base code laid down at our conception, much like the primal laws set down at the dawn of the world. For a long time in human history, we viewed this genetic ørlög as an unchangeable sentence, a fate we were powerless to alter. But then came the science of epigenetics and technologies like CRISPR, which reveal our biological wyrd. Epigenetics shows us that while our DNA sequence, our ørlög, remains fixed, the expression of those genes can be dramatically altered by our environment, our choices, our diet, and our experiences. These factors act like the choices of a Norse hero, turning genes on or off, influencing how our fundamental code is read and executed. This is the active weaving of our biological wyrd. And CRISPR takes this a revolutionary step further. It allows us to go back and actually edit the ørlög itself to rewrite the primal code. We are moving from being passive subjects of our genetic inheritance to active participants who can, in a very real sense, alter the layers of our own biological fate. The ancient Norse, with their complex view of a predetermined yet influenceable destiny, conceptually mapped out a reality that we are only now, thousands of years later, beginning to technologically master. They understood that patterns were inherent, but they also held onto the hope that those patterns were not necessarily the final word. This brings us to one of the most powerful and visceral stories in all of Norse mythology, a tale that perfectly encapsulates this hunger to master the code of existence, Odin's quest for the runes. The All-Father, the king of the gods, was not content with his immense power. He was driven by an insatiable thirst for a deeper, more fundamental wisdom, the kind that could only be purchased with immense personal sacrifice. The myth tells us that Odin hung himself from the branches of Yggdrasil, the great world tree he helped to sustain. He pierced his own side with his spear and hung there for 9 days and 9 nights, a offering of himself to himself, staring down into the shadowy waters of the well of Wyrd. He refused all sustenance and teetered on the very brink of death, pushing past the limits of pain and endurance in a desperate gamble for enlightenment. And what was the prize for this ultimate act of self-sacrifice? It was the runes, but these were not mere letters for writing. In the Norse worldview, the runes were far more profound. They were the fundamental forces of the universe, the primal sounds and symbols that underpinned all of reality. To know them was to understand the hidden architecture of creation. As Odin hung there, sacrificing his physical comfort and safety, the runes were revealed to him. He grasped their meanings, their powers, and their connections. He didn't just learn an alphabet, he downloaded the operating system of the cosmos, gaining the ability to see, to understand, and ultimately to influence the very weave of fate itself. Now, let's hold this ancient story side by side with the modern scientific endeavor. Is Odin's agonizing quest for the runes really so different from humanity's centuries-long, costly pursuit of genetic knowledge? Odin hung on the tree for 9 nights. We have built entire generations of scientific research upon the work of those who came before. Our sacrifice hasn't been one of physical pain. but one of immense intellectual effort, relentless experimentation, and staggering financial investment. We have peered into our own version of the well of Ørd, the microscopic world of the cell, and we have refused to look away from its terrifying complexity. Like Odin, we have been willing to venture into the unknown, to risk ethical quandaries and societal upheaval, all for the prize of understanding the code that writes us. And what are our runes? They are the 4 nucleotides that form the genetic alphabet: adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. These are our A, T, C, and G. Just as the Norse runes were more than symbols, these nucleotides are not just chemicals. They are the active, instructional code that governs the formation and function of every living thing. Mastering their sequence is the modern equivalent of mastering the runes. Odin gained the power to carve runes onto wood to cast spells and alter outcomes. Scientists are now gaining the power to edit genetic sequences to eliminate hereditary diseases, enhance crops, and potentially alter the course of human evolution. We are moving from being passive subjects of our genetic fate to becoming active, conscious authors, just as Odin sought to become an active author of destiny rather than its subject. His myth is the ultimate metaphor for the painful, expensive, and ethically fraught price of playing with the fundamental code of life, a warning and an inspiration that is more relevant today than ever before. Yet this profound power to rewrite our own source code brings with it an immense responsibility, a need for vigilance and oversight that the Norse also seem to anticipate in their lore. High above the other realms, stationed at the shimmering Bifrost bridge that connects the world of gods to the world of humanity, stood Heimdallr. He was the divine sentinel, the watchman of the Aesir, gifted with senses so impossibly acute that the myths claim he could hear the grass growing on the earth far below and the wool growing on the backs of sheep. His vision was so sharp he could see for hundreds of miles by day or by night, ensuring no threat to the divine order of Asgard could approach unseen. Heimdallr wasn't just a god, he was a perfect living surveillance system, a being whose entire purpose was to perceive the slightest disturbance in the natural order and sound the Yggdrasil horn to alert the gods to impending danger. Now consider the modern laboratory where CRISPR is deployed. This technology, for all its miraculous potential, is not without risk. An imprecise edit in the wrong place in the genome could have unintended, catastrophic consequences, potentially leading to new diseases or complications. So how do our modern geneticists ensure precision and safety? They have developed their own version of Heimdallr's phenomenal senses, incredibly sophisticated tools for genetic surveillance and monitoring. Techniques like next-generation sequencing and real-time PCR testing allow scientists to hear and see the cellular processes happening after a gene edit with breathtaking clarity. They can monitor which genes are being turned on or off, check for any unintended off-target effects, and listen in on the minute molecular conversations within a cell, all with a level of detail that would seem godlike to any previous generation. This isn't just about making the cut, it's about having the sensory capacity to ensure the cut was made correctly and that the cellular environment is responding as intended. Just as Heimdallr's hearing protected Asgard from chaos, this genetic hearing protects our biological experiments from cascading errors, allowing researchers to perceive the most subtle whispers of cellular activity. This conversation about fundamental codes and their rewriting inevitably leads us back to the very beginning, to the Norse story of creation itself. After Odin and his brothers had slain the giant Ymir and fashioned the physical world from his body, they came across 2 pieces of driftwood on a shore. These were not just logs, they were raw, inert material, base matter with no life or spirit of their own. The gods saw potential within this wood, a blank canvas upon which they could impart the spark of existence. Odin, the All-Father, leaned in and breathed into them the gift of spirit, the ørn, that vital force that animates all living things. Then Honir, another of the creator gods, bestowed Other, which is often translated as reason or keen intelligence, the capacity for thought and feeling. And finally, the god Lodr gave them La and Litugother, which means blood, healthy color, and physical form, the biological processes and the physical vessel to contain it all. Now let's pause and consider what this myth is actually describing. It is not a story of spontaneous generation or magical apparition. It is a precise, multi-step process of engineering. The gods took an inanimate object, a piece of wood, and through a series of deliberate, distinct interventions, they transformed it into a sentient, living being. They didn't just wave a hand, they installed the operating system, one critical update at a time. They provided the energy source, the processing software, and the hardware all separately. This is a stunningly accurate allegory for the very essence of synthetic biology and genetic engineering. Scientists today are not so different from those Norse gods standing on that primordial beach. They start with a base material, often a simple cell or a strand of DNA, which is, in its own way, just as inert and lacking in higher function as those two pieces of driftwood. Then, through precise interventions, they introduce new genetic code, editing and manipulating that base material to grant it new functions, new capabilities, even entirely new forms of life. The parallels become even more striking when we look at the specific gifts. Odin's breath of Ørn, the spirit, can be seen as the introduction of a metabolic pathway or the spark of electrical activity that defines a living neuron, the transition from inert chemistry to active biology. Honir's gift of Other, or reason, mirrors the engineering of cognitive functions, or, in more basic organisms, the programming of complex behaviors directly into a synthetic genome. And Lodr's contribution of physical form and blood is a direct parallel to the manipulation of phenotypic traits, engineered muscles, altered skeletal structures, or even the synthesis of artificial blood substitutes. The ancient myth perfectly captures the modern scientific process. You begin with raw material, and through targeted modifications, you bestow upon it the attributes of life. Ask and Embla were, in a very real sense, the first genetically modified organisms, their creation a story that has waited millennia for our technology to finally catch up to its vision. This foundational myth pushes us even further, challenging our very definition of what constitutes a natural state. If the first humans were literally engineered from trees by intelligent designers, the gods, then our original state is one of modification. There is no pure, unaltered human form in Norse mythology. Humanity itself is a product of deliberate, conscious bioengineering. This reframes the entire modern debate around CRISPR and genetic modification. The fear of playing God or creating designer babies is often framed as a violation of a natural order, but the Norse creation story suggests there never was a natural order in that static sense. From the very beginning, life was designed, it was manipulated, it was improved upon by a higher intelligence. This ancient perspective could liberate us from a certain kind of technological dread, suggesting that to modify our own biology is not to transgress against nature, but to participate in a cycle of creation that is as old as consciousness itself. We are simply taking up the tools that, according to the myth, were used to create us and continuing the work. Yet even as we marvel at the gods' orderly engineering of humanity, the Norse myths contain another, far more chaotic and creative force, one that embodies both the incredible promise and the inherent peril of rewriting life's code. This is Loki, the ultimate shape-shifter, a being who defies all categories of species and form. His exploits are legendary, not for his strength, but for his breathtaking fluidity. He doesn't just disguise himself, he physically transforms, rewriting his own biological essence at will. In one tale, he becomes a mare to distract a giant's magical stallion, later giving birth to Odin's eight-legged horse, Sleipnir. In another, he transforms into a salmon to escape the wrath of the gods, and in yet another he shifts into a fly or an elderly woman. Loki's entire existence is a testament to the complete and total malleability of physical form, a being whose identity is not fixed but is instead a constantly evolving performance. This profound ability to cross species barriers and alter fundamental biology is a powerful metaphor for the most advanced and controversial applications of CRISPR technology. We are moving beyond simply fixing faulty genes and into the realm of what's called transgenics, the transfer of genes from one species to another. Scientists are already exploring this creative potential. For instance, researchers are studying the genes of the extremely hardy tardigrade, a microscopic animal that can survive the vacuum of space, with the idea of one day potentially granting those resilience traits to human cells for long-duration space travel. Other experiments involve using CRISPR to alter pig organs so they can be safely transplanted into humans, effectively making the pig organ a biological shape-shifter, adopting a new identity to serve a new purpose. This is Loki's chaotic magic rendered in precise molecular terms, the power to fundamentally rewrite biological identity, to borrow traits from across the tree of life and weave them into a new, previously unimaginable whole. But Loki's story serves as a crucial warning as much as an inspiration. His transformations, while often clever and useful to the gods, are unpredictable and frequently lead to unintended, catastrophic consequences. The birth of Sleipnir, while resulting in a magnificent creature, was an utterly unforeseen outcome of his shape-shifting ruse. His mischief and boundary breaking ultimately contribute directly to the chain of events that leads to Ragnarok, the end of the world. He is the embodiment of innovation without foresight, creativity without a moral compass. This perfectly mirrors the profound ethical concerns surrounding CRISPR, especially when we discuss heritable edits to the human germline or radical transgenic creations. The science moves faster than our understanding of the long-term ramifications. Could an edit intended to eliminate disease inadvertently affect cognition or behavior? Could introducing genes from one species into another create new pathogens or disrupt ecosystems in ways we cannot predict? Loki is the mythic personification of this Pandora's box. His powers show us that the ability to change form is not the same as the wisdom to know which forms should be created, or the responsibility to manage the chaos that follows. He reminds us that the most powerful tools are often double-edged, capable of building wonders and unraveling the very fabric of reality. This pursuit of transformative power through a fundamental, almost alchemical change to one's very being finds a perfect echo in another incredible Norse myth, the story of the mead of poetry. This was no ordinary drink. It was a magical substance brewed from the blood of the wisest being ever to exist, mixed with honey, and said to contain the very essence of inspiration, wisdom, and eloquence. The myth tells a complex tale of murder, theft, and cunning, but the core promise is breathtakingly simple. Whoever drinks this mead undergoes a profound internal transformation. A simple man could drink it and become a great skald, a poet capable of crafting verses that could move kings to tears or armies to action. It granted not just knowledge, but a fundamental upgrade to one's capabilities, a rewriting of one's innate potential. Now, let's hold that ancient concept of a transformative liquid next to a modern medical miracle. What if we could create our own version of the mead of poetry? Not a drink of honey and blood, but a carefully engineered solution designed to rewrite our internal code for the better. This is the revolutionary promise of gene therapy. Instead of simply editing genes within the body's existing cells as CRISPR does, gene therapy works by introducing entirely new genetic material into a patient's cells. Scientists take a harmless virus, strip out its problematic genes, and use it as a delivery vehicle, a kind of microscopic drinking horn, to carry a therapeutic gene into the body's cells. Once inside, this new gene provides the instructions to produce a critical protein that the patient's body is missing or cannot make correctly. The parallels here are astonishing. Just as the mythical mead was consumed to bestow the gift of poetry and wisdom, gene therapy is consumed through an intravenous infusion or an injection, delivering its transformative payload directly into the bloodstream. The mead's magic worked from within, altering the drinker's very nature. Gene therapy works from within the cell, altering its fundamental biological function. For a child born with spinal muscular atrophy, a devastating genetic disorder, this modern mead doesn't grant the gift of verse, it grants the gift of movement, of breath, of life itself. The new gene instructs the body to produce a survival motor neuron protein, halting the disease's progression and fundamentally changing the child's biological destiny. In both cases, the act of consumption leads to a profound and permanent upgrade to the recipient's core abilities. This myth also carries a powerful warning about the dual-use nature of such transformative power, a theme that resonates deeply in modern bioethics. In the Norse tale, the mead was not meant for just anyone. It was guarded fiercely, first by a giant and later by Odin himself, because its power was too great to be unleashed carelessly. It could create wise rulers and brilliant poets, but in the wrong hands, it could also create incredibly persuasive tyrants or silver-tongued manipulators. The potential for misuse was inherent in its very potency. Gene therapy faces this exact same ethical landscape. The same technology that can cure a child of a horrific genetic illness could theoretically be used to pursue enhancement, to grant abilities beyond the natural human range, creating what some might call designer traits. This is the modern equivalent of the giant guarding the mead, a necessary and ongoing debate about who should have access to this power and for what purposes. Should we use it only to heal and cure, to bring people up to a baseline of health? Or do we venture into the territory of enhancement, potentially creating new social inequalities between those who can afford genetic upgrades and those who cannot? The ancient story of the mead of poetry, with its themes of stolen power and guarded knowledge, perfectly frames the modern conversation. It reminds us that a tool capable of rewriting our nature is never just a tool. It is a responsibility, a force that demands wisdom and foresight equal to the power it wields. The myth suggests that such transformative substances change not only the body but the soul of the society that chooses to use them. High above the carnage of a mortal battlefield, figures of immense power and purpose moved with an unnerving grace. These were the Valkyries, Odin's chosen shield maidens, and their duty was one of terrifying finality. They did not fight in the fray, they observed it. With eyes that could perceive the threads of fate, they would descend upon the slain, moving among the fallen warriors to make their solemn choices. Their selection was not random, nor was it based on simple compassion. They were curators of the afterlife, choosing only the most courageous, the most skilled, the most worthy half of the slain to be carried to the hallowed halls of Valhalla, where they would feast and prepare for the final battle of Ragnarok. Those not chosen were left behind, their fate sealed in the silent fields of another realm. This was a brutal, efficient form of triage, a divine selection process determining eternal glory or forgotten oblivion based on a set of inscrutable, predetermined criteria. This ancient, mythic act of selection finds a chillingly precise parallel in our modern world, not on a battlefield of clashing steel, but in the quiet, sterile environment of a genetics laboratory. The Valkyrie's solemn duty is echoed in the practice of genetic screening, a technology that allows us to peer into the deepest biological blueprint of a human embryo long before it is ever born. Through a process known as preimplantation genetic testing, scientists can now create multiple embryos through IVF and then examine each one for a vast array of genetic markers. They can screen for devastating hereditary diseases like Huntington's or cystic fibrosis, but also for a growing list of other traits, gender, certain predispositions, even markers statistically linked to specific talents or physical attributes. In this scenario, the geneticists and the prospective parents become the modern Valkyries. They are presented with a field of potential lives, each represented by a cluster of cells, and they are tasked with making a choice. Which embryos will be selected for life, implanted in the womb to develop into a child, and which will be deemed unworthy, left to perish or be used for research? The criteria for this selection are no longer the ethereal judgment of a goddess on a winged horse, but a readout of a T, C, and G on a computer screen. We are, in a very real sense, applying our own values to decide which genetic combinations are worthy of life and which are not, curating the next generation with a power the ancient Norsemen would have attributed only to the gods themselves. This immense power thrusts us directly into the heart of the same ethical maelstrom that the Valkyrie myth only hints at. The Valkyries chose based on a warrior's proven merit in battle, a form of post-birth accomplishment. Our genetic screening happens before life even begins, based on potential and probability. This raises profound and deeply unsettling questions. Where do we draw the line between preventing suffering and pursuing perfection? Is it ethically justifiable to select against an embryo because it carries the gene for a debilitating disease? Most would argue yes, but what about selecting against an embryo because it has a high probability of developing a condition that is manageable, like a predisposition to asthma or nearsightedness? The slope becomes dangerously slippery. The most frightening question of all emerges when we consider non-medical traits. If we can screen for a genetic marker loosely associated with musical aptitude or a taller stature, do we have a moral obligation to choose that embryo for our child? This moves us from the Valkyrie's role of choosing the already brave into the realm of engineering the potentially brave, from selection to enhancement. The myth forces us to confront the values behind our choices. The Valkyries served Odin's singular purpose, to amass an army of the best for a specific apocalyptic goal. What is our purpose? Is it to create a healthier society, or could it subtly shift toward creating a society that conforms to a narrow, modern ideal of perfection, inadvertently eliminating genetic diversity and the invaluable lessons that come from navigating life's challenges? The silent, unselected warriors left on the field in Norse myth are a haunting reminder of what and who might be left behind in our own relentless pursuit of a perfect genetic future. But this cycle of creation and destruction, of weaving and unweaving, points toward the ultimate expression of these forces in Norse lore, Ragnarok. This is not merely an apocalypse in the modern sense of a final, obliterating end. It is a prophesied series of events so cataclysmic that they unravel the very fabric of the cosmos. The skies darken, the earth quakes and splits apart, and the monstrous wolf Fenrir breaks free from his bonds. The Midgard serpent rises from the ocean, poisoning the seas and skies, while Loki leads an army of giants against the gods on the burning Rainbow Bridge. In the ensuing battles, nearly all the major figures fall. Odin is consumed by the wolf, Thor succumbs to the serpent's venom after slaying it, and Heimdallr and Loki kill one another. The sun and moon are swallowed, the stars vanish from the heavens, and the great world tree itself trembles, its groans echoing through the void. The world is consumed by fire and then submerged in a rising flood, leaving only silence and emptiness in its wake. Yet this total annihilation is not the final word. The Norse vision of Ragnarok holds within it a crucial and often overlooked seed of hope. From the floodwaters, a new world emerges, fresh and green. A new sun, the daughter of the old one, rises in the sky. A handful of gods survive, including Odin's sons Vidar and Vali and Thor's children. Even 2 humans, sheltered deep within the wood of Yggdrasil, emerge to repopulate this reborn earth. The cycle is not broken, it is completed. The old world, which had become burdened with strife, corruption, and broken oaths, is washed away to make room for a new, more peaceful and harmonious existence. Ragnarok is therefore a necessary recalibration of the universe, a destructive but ultimately creative act that clears away the old, failed structures to allow for a new beginning. This concept of a necessary destruction preceding a rebirth finds a powerful and somewhat unsettling parallel in the potential application of CRISPR technology. We can view the current human genome not as a perfect, finished product, but as a structure that has been built upon over millennia of evolution, accumulating its own forms of strife and corruption in the shape of genetic diseases, vulnerabilities, and outdated evolutionary adaptations. CRISPR offers us the potential to initiate our own controlled, molecular-scale Ragnarok. We could, in theory, use this tool to correct these ancient mistakes within our genetic code. This wouldn't mean the end of humanity, but the end of a specific, flawed version of it. We could reboot entire genetic lines, eliminating hereditary diseases like Huntington's or sickle cell anemia from a family's lineage forever. We could potentially correct genetic predispositions to cancer or Alzheimer's, effectively burning away these old threats, much like the fire of Ragnarok consumed the old world. The creative potential is as staggering as the destructive power. Just as a new, more verdant world rose from the waters after the flood, a genetically rebooted humanity could emerge with greater resilience, health, and longevity. This represents the ultimate expression of moving from being subjects of our biology to becoming its authors. We are talking about guiding our own evolution, consciously steering away from paths of suffering and toward a future that was once only imaginable in myth. The two humans who survived Ragnarok by hiding in Yggdrasil were called Lif and Lifthrasir, meaning life and desirer of life. Their names signify a fresh start, a chance to do things differently. CRISPR gives us the tools to become the guardians of our own Lif and Lifthrasir, to offer future generations a chance at a life free from the genetic burdens of the past. However, the myth of Ragnarok is also a solemn warning against the hubris of uncontrolled destruction. The gods did not choose Ragnarok. It was a fate that unfolded because of their past actions, their broken promises, and the chaotic forces they could no longer contain. This mirrors the profound ethical danger in wielding a power as fundamental as genetic editing. A global, careless application of CRISPR could indeed become a biological Ragnarok, an irreversible catastrophe. Driving a particular genetic trait to extinction in a population could have unforeseen consequences, much like the death of Baldur, the god of light, was a precursor to the end of all things. It could reduce the beautiful, resilient diversity of the human genome, our own biological Yggdrasil, to a sterile, engineered monoculture, vulnerable to a single new disease or environmental change that we failed to predict. The creative power to reboot our genetic code is inseparable from the destructive power to irrevocably break it. The myth teaches us that rebirth is possible, but it comes at a terrible cost, and it should not be sought without immense wisdom, humility, and a reverence for the complex, interconnected system we are about to change forever. Even as the gods prepared for their final destiny, one of their most critical acts was not one of creation, but of necessary, terrifying restraint. This is the story of Fenrir, the monstrous wolf, a son of Loki whose immense power and boundless growth presented a clear and existential threat to the entire cosmic order. The prophecies foretold that he would break free during Ragnarok and devour Odin himself. The gods knew they could not kill him without breaking a sacred oath and bringing unimaginable dishonor upon themselves. Their only solution was to find a way to contain him, to bind his devastating potential without destroying him. They attempted to chain him twice with massive metal fetters, and twice the growing wolf easily shattered them. Finally, they commissioned the dwarves to craft something far more cunning than crude iron, a magical ribbon called Gleipnir. This was no ordinary rope. It was fashioned from 6 impossible ingredients: the sound of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, and the spittle of a bird. Though it seemed as light and soft as a silken thread, it was imbued with a magic that made it utterly unbreakable. The wolf, suspicious of this delicate-looking bond, only agreed to be bound by it if one of the gods placed a hand in his mouth as a pledge of good faith. The god Tyr, embodying immense courage and sacrifice, did so. When Fenrir found he could not break free, he bit off Tyr's hand. The wolf was successfully restrained, his world-ending potential locked away, but the cost of that control was permanent and profound. This ancient narrative of binding a destructive force with a subtle, almost ethereal constraint is a breathtakingly precise metaphor for one of the most powerful and elegant applications of CRISPR technology. We are not always using these molecular scissors to cut genes out entirely. Often, the goal is not destruction but control. We seek to bind a genetic expression to suppress a powerful biological process that, if left unchecked, could cause immense harm, much like the unfettered growth of Fenrir. This is achieved through a brilliant technique that doesn't edit the gene itself, but effectively silences it. Scientists can use a modified version of the CRISPR system, often called CRISPR interference or CRISPR. Instead of using the Cas9 enzyme to make a clean cut in the DNA, they can deactivate its cutting function and fuse it to a repressor protein. This modified complex is still guided by its RNA instructions to the exact genetic address of a troublesome gene. But once it arrives, it doesn't slice. Instead, it sits firmly on top of the gene like a strategic roadblock, physically preventing the cellular machinery from reading it and initiating the production of its protein. The dangerous genetic instruction is still there, preserved in the genome, but its expression is completely suppressed, bound by a molecular Gleipnir. Consider the parallel. The gods used a ribbon made of impossible things to physically restrain an impossible creature. Scientists use a tool crafted from a bacterial defense system to biologically restrain a destructive genetic process. The result is the same. A potent force is neutralized, its capacity for chaos negated. This approach is being explored for a host of conditions where a gene is overactive or producing a toxic protein. In certain forms of Huntington's disease, for instance, the problem is a dominant toxic gene that causes progressive neurological damage. A traditional CRISPR cut to remove it carries risks, but a CRISPR system could be designed to bind to that gene and silence its destructive output, potentially halting the disease's progression without making a permanent, irreversible change to the underlying DNA. It is a form of magical, biological restraint. Yet, the myth of Fenrir's binding carries with it a crucial and sobering warning that resonates deeply with the ethical considerations of this technology. The god's victory was not clean. It required a trick, and it demanded a terrible sacrifice. Tyr's hand. This speaks directly to the potential unintended consequences and the ethical cost of genetic restraint. When we choose to suppress a genetic expression, we must be certain we understand its full role in the complex symphony of biology. A gene that seems purely destructive in one context might have subtle, vital functions in another. Silencing it could have unforeseen side effects, a biological form of Tyr losing his hand. Furthermore, who decides which genetic expressions are the Fenrirs that need binding? The process involves a profound value judgment about what constitutes a monstrous trait versus a natural, if challenging, aspect of human diversity. The myth reminds us that the act of control, however necessary it may seem, is never without cost and must be approached with the same courage and acceptance of responsibility that Tyr displayed, understanding that our interventions, however well-intentioned, will have permanent and far-reaching effects. But the pursuit of this knowledge is only half the equation. The true power lies in its application, in a tangible substance that can enact these profound changes. And here, the Norse myths provide perhaps their most stunning and direct parallel yet, the golden apples of the goddess Idun. In the tales, these were no ordinary fruits. They were the very source of the god's vitality. Idun guarded them in her casket, and it was by consuming these magical apples at regular intervals that the Aesir maintained their youth and strength, staving off the decay of age indefinitely. Without this divine sustenance, the gods would grow old, weak, and frail, becoming vulnerable and mortal. The theft of these apples was a recurring crisis in the myths, a catastrophe that threatened the very foundation of Asgard because it meant the certain and gradual end of its divine inhabitants. This wasn't just about vanity, it was about the essential maintenance of their very existence. Now, let's hold this ancient concept up to the most cutting-edge frontier of modern genetic science, the pursuit of biological age reversal. Idun's apples are a near-perfect allegory for the goals of gerontology and genetic therapy today. Scientists are no longer just trying to treat age-related diseases. They are actively researching ways to target the underlying mechanisms of aging itself. They are searching for our own version of the golden apple, a biological intervention that can reset cellular age, repair accumulated damage, and essentially tell the body to remain youthful. And just like the gods needed to consume the apples regularly, these wouldn't be one-time cures, but ongoing treatments that maintain a state of health span extension. The parallels become even more exact when we look at the specific mechanisms. The magic of Idun's apples presumably worked by renewing the gods on a fundamental level. Today, research into compounds like NAD+ boosters and rapamycin analogs, or genetic therapies involving telomerase activation and senolytic drugs THAT Chinese letter Chinese letter Chinese letter Chinese letter Chinese letter Chinese letter clear senescent cells aims to do precisely that. These therapies are designed to rejuvenate cells, enhance mitochondrial function, and clear out the biological garbage that accumulates with time, effectively hitting the refresh button on our tissues and organs. We are attempting to create a pharmacological casket of Idun, a treatment that delivers a periodic boost to our systems to combat the inevitable decline that the Norse attributed to being cut off from the divine fruit. This myth also offers a profound insight into the societal and psychological impact of such a breakthrough. In the stories, the loss of the apples threw all of Asgard into a panic. The gods' identity, their power, and their very survival were intrinsically linked to this single source of renewal. It made them dependent. This mirrors the immense ethical and social questions we must confront. If a genuine anti-aging therapy were developed, who would have access to it? Would it become the ultimate luxury, creating an eternal upper class of ageless elites, while the rest of humanity withers and dies? The myth suggests that control over longevity is control over power itself. Furthermore, the gods' constant need for the apples hints that this would not be a one-and-done solution, but a lifelong dependency on a pharmaceutical or technological regimen, creating a new form of biological imperative that could shape the entirety of human society around its procurement and distribution. The golden apples were not just a miracle cure, they were a source of both salvation and vulnerability, a duality we are only beginning to appreciate as we ourselves reach for the same forbidden fruit. Deep within the mountain halls of Svartalfheim, away from the eyes of gods and men, the dwarven smiths toiled. In Norse myth, these were not mere forgers of simple swords and shields. They were the original master engineers, bio-artisans whose creations blurred the line between object and organism. They crafted Odin's unerring spear Gungnir, which could never miss its mark, and Thor's mighty hammer Mjolnir, a weapon that would magically return to his hand after every throw. But their most profound work involved imbuing inanimate matter with life and consciousness itself. They fashioned the golden boar Gullinbursti, a living, breathing creature of metal that could run across the sky and sea, illuminating the darkness with its glowing bristles. They even created a full set of intelligent, talking mechanical servants for the god Frey, automata that could think for themselves and perform any task. The dwarves didn't just make things, they programmed functionality and life directly into their creations, building purpose and ability into the very fabric of their materials. This incredible mythic craftsmanship finds its most direct parallel not in a machine shop, but in the most advanced laboratories of our time in the field of synthetic biology. Here, our modern dwarves are the bioengineers, and their forges are sterile workbenches equipped with DNA synthesizers and incubators. Instead of using iron and magic, these scientists use the 4 nucleotides of DNA T, C, and G as their raw ore. Their goal is remarkably similar: to design and build biological systems and organisms that do not exist in nature, programming them with specific, useful functions from the ground up. This isn't about editing existing life as with CRISPR. This is about writing entirely new genetic code and installing it into a blank cellular chassis, effectively constructing new life forms to specification. Consider the process. The ancient dwarves understood the properties of their materials at a fundamental level, combining them in ways that produced miraculous results. Today, synthetic biologists use vast digital databases of genetic parts, promoters, genes. Regulators, much like a master smith, would have a repertoire of alloys and enchantments. They can design a genetic circuit on a computer, a set of instructions that will tell a cell to behave in a certain way. For instance, they can design bacteria that act as living sensors, programming them to glow a fluorescent green when they detect a specific toxin in water, a biological alarm system far more sensitive than any mechanical device. This is the modern Gullenbursty, a living entity created to serve a precise purpose, its glowing bristles replaced by a reporter gene that signals its function. The most profound parallel lies in the creation of self-operating systems. The dwarves' intelligent automata for the god Frey were machines that could perceive their environment and act independently. In labs today, researchers are creating what they call biocomputers. They have engineered cells with genetic circuits that can perform basic logic functions like and, or gates. By combining these, they can create living cells that make complex decisions. A scientist could, for example, design a therapeutic yeast cell that can detect the specific sugar and pH levels inside a human gut, and only then manufacture and release a drug, making the critical decision about when treatment is needed entirely on its own. This is a level of integrated, intelligent design that moves beyond simple tools and into the realm of creating truly autonomous biological agents, a direct echo of the dwarves' most magical and sentient creations. Yet, the myths also carry a crucial warning about the responsibility that comes with such godlike power. The dwarves were often compelled to create through tricks, promises, or threats from the gods, and their magnificent creations frequently became the catalysts for divine conflict and unforeseen tragedy. The story of the mead of poetry, which was brewed from the blood of a being of ultimate wisdom, is a prime example of a transformative substance that led to theft, deceit, and war once its power was unleashed upon the world. This serves as a powerful allegory for the dual-use nature of synthetic biology. The same techniques used to engineer life-saving bacteria that clean up oil spills could be misused to engineer pathogens. The ability to design entirely new life forms comes with an immense ethical burden to foresee not only their intended function, but their potential for misuse, mutation, or ecological disruption should they ever escape the controlled environment of the lab. The dwarves worked in mountain halls for a reason. Their creations were too powerful for the outside world to handle unprepared. As we step into the role of the modern dwarven smith, we must ask ourselves if we have built the equivalent of those mountain halls, the ethical frameworks and containment protocols, strong enough to hold the magnificent and potentially monstrous creations we are now learning to bring into being. Yet this power to weave and reweave reality was not seen as a neutral or even wholly respectable craft in the Norse world. The practice of seidr was deeply complex, shrouded in a potent mix of awe and unease, largely because it was a form of magic that tradition held was primarily, though not exclusively, the domain of women. Practitioners known as seidrkennur would enter trance-like states, often sitting on a special high platform, to journey beyond the physical realm. They chanted Galdr, incantations that were not mere words but sonic vibrations intended to resonate with and reshape the fabric of reality itself. Their goal was to bend the threads of fate that the Norns had woven, to see future outcomes, to curse enemies with illness or misfortune, to influence weather patterns for a good harvest, or to bless a voyage with favorable winds. It was an act of supreme will over the natural order, a direct intervention into the processes that govern life and destiny. If we view the genetic code as our modern framework of fate, then the laboratory and its tools become our platform for high-seat magic. The scientist, peering into a microscope or analyzing a digital sequence, is entering a focused, almost trance-like state of deep concentration, shutting out the world to perceive a reality invisible to the naked eye. And the tools they use are our modern Galdr, our vibrational incantations. The most common method for delivering CRISPR edits into a cell involves using a brief electrical pulse or sound waves of physical vibration to temporarily open the cell's membrane and allow the editing machinery to enter. This is a literal, physical resonance used to manipulate the fundamental code of a living thing, a process that is eerily analogous to the seidrkennur's chants resonating with the invisible threads of fate to produce a tangible change in the world. The most striking parallel, however, lies in the intention and the outcome. A seidrkennur might perform a ritual to protect a child from a plague sweeping through the village, attempting to alter their wyrd to avoid sickness. Today, a geneticist might use CRISPR to edit the CCR5 gene in a patient's white blood cells, making them naturally resistant to HIV infection. Both practitioners are intervening in a pre-written biological destiny to produce a specific, healthier outcome. The ancient magic and the modern science are both expressions of a deep human desire to not just accept our fate, but to take up the tools available to us and consciously, deliberately reshape it. We have simply traded the chanting and the trance for pipettes and polymerase chain reactions, but the fundamental goal of rewriting reality to avert suffering and exert control remains identical. This comparison also forces us to confront the same deep-seated cultural ambivalence that surrounded seidr. The practice, while powerful, was often viewed with suspicion and fear, even by the gods themselves. When Odin sought to master it, he was accused by Loki of practicing a form of magic that was ørlög, unmanly or perverse, because it was associated with the feminine. This stigma highlights a timeless human anxiety about tampering with the fundamental order of things, a fear that such knowledge comes at a social or spiritual cost. We see this same anxiety reverberating in our modern debates over the ethics of genetic engineering, often labeled with the same charge of playing God. The hesitation is not just about safety, but about a profound, almost instinctual sense that some boundaries are not meant to be crossed, that this deep manipulation of life's essence carries a taboo as powerful as the one that surrounded the seidrkennur. The myth suggests that the pursuit of this knowledge has always required a certain bravery, a willingness to transgress social norms and face potential ostracism in the quest for a power that can fundamentally alter the human condition. This deep-seated human desire to transcend our biological limits and take on new forms finds perhaps its most compelling expression in the Norse belief in the hammer, a concept that goes far beyond simple disguise. The hammer was understood as one's outward shape or form, but it was also something more, a kind of malleable energetic shell that could, for those with the knowledge and power, be radically altered. This wasn't about putting on a mask, it was a fundamental transformation of one's very being. The gods and certain gifted individuals could shed their usual hammer like a garment and take on an entirely new one, becoming a different animal, a member of the opposite gender, or even an inanimate object. Loki, as we've seen, was the ultimate master of this art, but he was not alone. Odin himself would often travel Midgard in the hammer of an old man with one eye, and other sorcerers were said to be able to project their consciousness into the hammer of an animal, like a bear or wolf, to do their bidding. This shapeshifting was the ultimate act of biological fluidity, a complete rewrite of the physical self. When we place this ancient magical concept next to the emerging potential of genetic engineering, the parallels stop being merely symbolic and start to feel almost prophetic. The ability to alter one's hammer is in essence the ultimate goal of a certain branch of genetic science. While our current use of CRISPR is focused on correcting genetic errors, the theoretical horizon is far more expansive. What if we could go beyond repair and move into the realm of deliberate, wholesale enhancement or even transformation? Scientists are already exploring the genetic switches that control morphology, the shape and form of an organism. By studying master control genes, like the Hox genes that determine the body plan of everything from a fruit fly to a human, we are beginning to understand the software that builds the biological hardware. The idea of one day using this knowledge to, for instance, activate dormant genes that could confer novel traits like enhanced night vision by incorporating genetic elements from owls or cats, or extreme cold tolerance from genes found in Arctic fish, is no longer pure science fiction. This would be a direct, conscious alteration of the human hammer, not through magic, but through the precise editing of our genetic source code. The mythical implications of this are profound. The Norse stories treat this power with a mixture of awe and trepidation, and for good reason. Changing one's hammer was not a casual party trick. It was a dangerous endeavor that could have unintended consequences. In one tale, the god Freyja lends a falcon's hammer to Loki to help him on a journey, highlighting that these forms could be shared or borrowed, much like how we might one day share genetic templates or therapies. But there are also warnings. In another story, a sorceress named Eljot changed her hammer into that of a walrus to fight a man named Grettir and was killed in that form. This speaks to a deep fear that once you change your fundamental shape, you might not be able to change back, or you might become trapped in an identity that is not your own. This is a powerful allegory for the risks of permanent germline editing or transgenic experiments. If we were to edit the human genome to incorporate non-human traits for generations to come, we would be making a permanent alteration to the collective human hammer, a change that could have unforeseen ecological, social, and psychological repercussions that we cannot simply undo. The myth suggests that the power to change form is inseparable from the risk of losing your original self. This brings us to the most fascinating and ethically complex layer of the hammer concept, its connection to identity. In the Norse worldview, even when a person's hammer changed, their core self, their hugger, or mind remained intact inside it. A bear that was actually a Viking in a bear's hammer still thought and reasoned like a Viking. This challenges our very notion of what makes a species. If we were to genetically engineer a human with enhanced physical traits borrowed from the animal kingdom, at what point does that person stop being purely human? Would they be a new category of being, a different hammer with a human hugger? This forces us to confront questions of identity, rights, and belonging that we are barely equipped to handle. The ancient belief in the separation of form and consciousness provides a philosophical framework for this coming debate, suggesting that the essence of a person could remain constant even as their physical vessel is dramatically altered. The myths of the hammer don't just predict our technological future, they provide a 1,000-year-old conversation starter for the ethical and existential dilemmas we are only just beginning to face. But our pursuit of wisdom often demands a far steeper price, a truth powerfully illustrated by another of Odin's profound sacrifices. Long after he had hung from the world tree to win the runes, the All-Father's thirst for understanding remained unquenched. He journeyed alone to the very roots of Yggdrasil, to a place where the waters of the well of Ørd seeped into the earth. Here resided Mimir, a being of immense and ancient wisdom, the guardian of a spring whose waters held the knowledge of all things that ever were, are, or could be. This was not a well for the simple or the faint of heart. Its wisdom was profound, terrifying, and required absolute commitment to obtain. Mimir agreed to let Odin drink from the well, but the cost was not gold or favors, it was the god's own right eye. Without hesitation, Odin plucked it from his head and offered it to the guardian, lowering himself to drink deeply from the waters that would grant him a vision of the cosmos so complete it bordered on omniscience. He gained the ability to see the interconnectedness of all events, to understand the deepest patterns of cause and effect that governed the 9 realms. This was not just learning facts, it was about internalizing the very framework of existence, a wisdom written in the language of the universe itself. This staggering mythic transaction finds a hauntingly resonant parallel in our modern understanding of the human genome. Our DNA is, in a very real sense, our own biological well of Mimir. It is a deep, ancient reservoir that holds not just the instructions to build a human body, but the entire evolutionary history of our species. Woven into those 3 billion base pairs is the story of every ancestor who ever lived and reproduced, every survival challenge they overcame, every adaptation they encoded to be passed down to us. This is our genetic memory. It isn't memory in the cognitive sense of recalling events, but a physical, molecular record of our deep past. It's the reason some of us might have a predisposition for certain skills, or a genetic resistance to diseases that plagued our ancestors millennia ago. Our genome is Mimir's well, and we are all, from the moment of conception, drinking from it, inheriting this vast, silent library of ancestral experience. The question then becomes, what if we could do more than just passively inherit this information? What if we could, like Odin, consciously access its deepest recesses? This is where the connection to CRISPR technology becomes truly mind-bending. While we are not literally retrieving memories, scientists are actively exploring how to reactivate dormant genetic sequences, ancient instructions that were switched off through evolution because they were no longer needed, but which still reside within us, silent and unused. These are sometimes called ghost sequences or genetic fossils. For instance, all humans possess the genetic remnants of the machinery to produce vast amounts of vitamin C, a trait our primate ancestors lost when their diet became rich in fruit. The gene is still there, but it's broken, a pseudogene that no longer functions. With advanced gene editing, the theoretical potential exists to one day repair and reactivate such ancient, dormant pathways, effectively remembering a biological ability our species forgot millions of years ago. This concept extends beyond simple traits to more complex evolutionary echoes. Some researchers theorize about the potential to access ancient immune responses coded into our DNA, reactions that successfully fought off primordial plagues and which could hold the key to combating modern antibiotic-resistant superbugs. It would be like consulting the deepest, most ancient ledger in Mimir's well, pulling a strategy for survival from our biological past to solve a crisis in our present. This isn't about creating something new, it's about remembering something old, something that is already an intrinsic, albeit silent, part of us. In this light, CRISPR becomes less like a cutting tool and more like a key, unlocking sealed chambers within our own genetic library that we never knew how to open. Yet Odin's story serves as a timeless and crucial warning. His sacrifice was not just physical, it was deeply symbolic. He traded a part of his immediate, worldly perception, one eye focused on the present, for a timeless, all-encompassing vision that could perceive the intricate weave of past, present, and future. He gained unimaginable wisdom, but he paid for it with a piece of his humanity, forever becoming the one-eyed god who had seen too much. This perfectly frames the immense ethical dilemma of tampering with our evolutionary heritage. What unforeseen consequences might arise from reactivating genetic code that nature itself saw fit to retire? An ancient immune response, once vital, could trigger devastating autoimmune disorders in the modern world. A reactivated metabolic pathway could disrupt our finely tuned contemporary biology in ways we cannot predict. The wisdom we seek from our genetic well might come at a cost we are not prepared to pay, forcing us to sacrifice a certain biological simplicity for a complexity we may not be equipped to handle. Odin's story reminds us that true wisdom is never free, and the power to see everything often means losing the ability to see things simply. Before the worlds were even a dream, before the gods drew breath, there existed only Ginnungagap. This was not merely empty space, it was the ultimate void, a yawning chasm of pure, undifferentiated potential where nothing existed, and yet everything was possible. It was a silent, dark, and cosmic blank slate, and then, from the meeting of the elemental realms of icy Niflheim and fiery Muspelheim, a reaction occurred within this void. The heat met the ice, and from that primordial interaction, the first building blocks of all existence, the giant Ymir and the cosmic cow Heimdallr, began to slowly form and coalesce. Life, and indeed all of reality, did not appear from nothing, but emerged from the fundamental, interacting ingredients of the cosmos stirring within the great void. This ancient creation story finds a stunningly parallel narrative in our modern scientific understanding of life's origins, the primordial soup theory. Just as the Norse conceived of a chaotic void from which order emerged, scientists theorize that Earth's early oceans and atmosphere formed a vast planetary-scale Ginnungagap, a rich chemical broth simmering under the heat of a young sun and the energy of lightning strikes. Within this ancient aquatic cauldron, the fundamental nucleotides, lipids, and amino acids that had naturally formed began to interact, link together, and self-organize. From this seemingly random chaos of non-living chemistry, the first self-replicating molecules, the ancestors of all DNA, spontaneously arose. In both the myth and the theory, the principle is identical. Complex life is not built from the top down, but assembles itself from the bottom up, emerging from the interaction of simple, foundational components within a receptive void. This brings us to the breathtaking power of modern gene editing. CRISPR technology allows us to perform what can only be described as a scientific return to Ginnungagap. For the first time, we are not just observing life's building blocks. We are actively reaching back into that primordial state of potential to begin the process of creation anew. We can take a simple, blank slate bacterial cell or a basic human stem cell, our own modern microscopic version of the void, and introduce new genetic instructions. We are no longer passive observers of the evolutionary process that began in that ancient soup. We have become the directors of it. We can now decide which ingredients to combine and what new forms of existence should coalesce from the previously undifferentiated potential of a cell. This ability to design life from its most fundamental level is akin to the Norse god stepping into Ginnungagap and deciding what the world should be, moving from a state of random chance to one of conscious, deliberate design. The ultimate expression of this power is the burgeoning field of synthetic biology, which aims not to edit existing life, but to build entirely new life forms from the basic chemicals up, a true modern-day act of genesis. Scientists are now working to create a minimal genome, the absolute smallest set of genes required for a cell to live and replicate. This is the biological equivalent of defining the precise conditions of Niflheim's ice and Muspelheim's fire needed to spark something from nothing. Once this minimal cell exists, it becomes a universal biological chassis, a living Ginnungagap in a petri dish. Researchers can then program this empty vessel with entirely synthetic DNA, writing genetic code that has never existed in nature to bestow functions never before seen in any organism. We could design bacteria whose sole purpose is to seek out and digest plastic waste in the ocean, or algae that efficiently produce biofuels by following a genetic script we have written. We are moving from interpreting the book of life to authoring entirely new chapters in a volume we first glimpsed in our oldest stories, finally possessing the tools to turn the silent potential of the primordial void into a symphony of our own conscious creation. Yet for all his cunning and his invaluable, often chaotic help, Loki's transgressions eventually cross a line from which there is no return. His role in orchestrating the death of the beloved god Baldur is the final straw, an act of such profound malice that it shatters the fragile peace of Asgard and sets the unchangeable events of Ragnarok into motion. The gods' response is not to kill him, for that would be too simple and might violate deeper cosmic laws. Instead, they choose a far more profound and symbolic punishment. They seize Loki and bind him deep within a cavern, using the entrails of his own son, Nafi, as the fetters that hold him fast. The goddess Skadi then fastens a venomous serpent above his head, its poison dripping onto his face for all eternity. His wife, Sigyn, remains loyal, holding a bowl to catch the venom, but each time she must empty it, the poison strikes his skin, causing him to writhe in agony so violent that the earth itself shakes. This is not merely an imprisonment, it is a total and permanent restraint of a chaotic force, a binding designed to neutralize his transformative power and contain the chaos he represents until the end of days. This mythic act of binding a dangerous, unpredictable power is a powerful allegory for the global conversation now surrounding CRISPR. The technology's potential for good is as immense as Loki's cleverness, but its potential for misuse or catastrophic error is equally terrifying, a Pandora's box of biological chaos. And so, much like the Aesir, our global society is engaged in the difficult, necessary work of forging our own bonds, not from entrails, but from international agreements, ethical frameworks, and stringent government regulations. The scientific community itself has become a kind of modern Skadi, actively advocating for caution and self-imposed limits. Prominent researchers have called for moratoriums on certain uses of the technology, particularly heritable edits to the human germline, recognizing that some changes could echo through generations with unforeseen consequences. The parallel deepens when we consider the nature of the constraints. Loki's binding is specifically designed to counteract his unique abilities. The entrails of his son signify that the tool of his punishment is born from his own destructive actions, a poetic and brutal justice. Similarly, the regulations being developed for CRISPR are not generic rules. They are highly specific, crafted to address the technology's unique risks. Oversight committees and bioethics panels act as the loyal Sigyn, constantly monitoring the situation and attempting to mitigate the harm. But her occasional failure to catch the poison, which causes the earth to shake, is a perfect metaphor for the near-constant fear of a safety breach, a genetically modified organism escaping a lab, an unethical actor creating a bioweapon, or a well-intentioned edit having a disastrous off-target effect that reverberates through an ecosystem or a population. Loki's punishment is ultimately about accountability and the societal need to control what it cannot destroy. We cannot un-invent CRISPR, just as the gods could not simply wish Loki out of existence. His chaos is a part of their world, and this technology is now a permanent part of ours. The binding represents a collective decision that some powers are too volatile to be left unchecked, that the freedom to innovate must be balanced against the responsibility to protect. The ongoing global effort to establish rules for CRISPR use, from the strict regulations in the European Union to the more varied guidelines in the United States, is our attempt to build a cave strong enough to hold this new form of magic. It is an admission that without these careful, considered bindings, the very transformative power that could cure our diseases and alleviate, 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 shares our world to its core. While the gods prepared for the final battle, their most crucial project was the constant curation and training of the Einherjar, the singularly honored dead who earned a place in Valhalla. These were not mere fallen soldiers granted a pleasant afterlife. They were a carefully selected army, the ultimate special forces unit being primed for the apocalypse itself. Each day on the fields of Asgard, they would engage in ferocious, deadly combat, honing their skills to a razor's edge. And each evening, their wounds would be magically healed and they would feast, ready to do it all again the next day. This cycle was a form of perpetual enhancement, a divine training regimen designed to forge the most formidable warriors imaginable, pushing them beyond normal mortal limits again and again until they reached a state of perfected martial prowess. They were biological weapons in the making, their very essence reshaped for a single, catastrophic purpose: to fight and die well in the final battle. This ancient concept of a designed, enhanced warrior built for a specific, world-altering conflict moves from the realm of myth into the realm of tangible possibility with the advent of advanced genetic engineering. The modern equivalent of the Yggdrasil is no longer a fantasy. It is the subject of serious, albeit speculative, discussion in bioethics and military science. We are approaching the point where the idea of a genetically enhanced soldier is not science fiction, but a potential future reality. Research is already underway into genetic factors that could confer advantages in extreme environments, such as increased resistance to hypoxia for high-altitude fighters or enhanced muscle fiber composition for greater strength and endurance. The intention is not so different from Odin's: to create a warrior who can operate at peak efficiency under the most brutal conditions imaginable, whose very biology gives them an edge on the battlefield. The ethical questions this raises are as profound as they are disturbing. The Yggdrasil were chosen based on their proven courage and skill in a life already lived. Their enhancement began after their death as a reward. But what if we could pre-select for these traits? What if, using the Valkyrie-like power of genetic screening, we could identify embryos with a predisposition for lower fear response, higher pain tolerance, or faster cognitive processing? And what if we could then use gene editing to amplify these traits, creating a person whose very nature is optimized for combat from the moment of conception? This moves us from selection to actual design, from honoring natural bravery to engineering synthetic courage. We must ask ourselves, is it ethical to create a human being for a specific, dangerous purpose? Does designing a person to be a perfect soldier strip them of the autonomy to choose not to be one? The myth presents the Yggdrasil as willing and joyous participants, but their choice was made in a previous life. A designed soldier would have their path chosen for them before they ever drew a first breath. This dilemma extends beyond the military sphere into the very notion of designing humans for purpose. The Yggdrasil were designed for Ragnarok, but what about designing humans for other extreme environments? We could theorize about engineering astronauts with enhanced radiation resistance and a reduced need for sleep for long-duration space voyages, or deep-sea engineers with a greater tolerance for pressure and cold. While these applications sound beneficial, they still reduce the human being to a tool, a biological solution to a logistical problem. It creates a worrying potential for a new form of biological caste system, where individuals are designed and perhaps even viewed according to their utility. The Yggdrasil, for all their glory, were ultimately tools for the gods' war. A society that begins designing humans for purpose risks forgetting that each individual possesses an intrinsic worth that exists entirely separate from their designed function. The most chilling question embedded in the myth is not whether we can create such beings, but whether in doing so, we would forget how to value them as people, seeing them only as instruments for a greater goal, no matter how noble that goal might seem. Yet this power to build connections between disparate realms was not a new idea. The Norse had already envisioned a structure of breathtaking elegance and profound purpose that served this exact function. Shimmering across the sky, visible to all yet traversable only by the gods, was the Bifrost Bridge. This was no ordinary construction of wood and stone. The myths describe it as a burning rainbow, a three-strand bridge of radiant color that connected the world of mortals, Midgard, to the divine realm of Asgard. It was not merely a convenience for travel, it was a sacred conduit, the only permanent pathway between the human and the divine. Heimdallr stood as its vigilant guardian for a reason. This was a crucial boundary, a link that allowed for communication and influence between vastly different orders of existence while still maintaining the essential separation that defined them. The bridge was both a connection and a filter, a symbol of the potential for interaction between worlds that were never meant to be fully merged. We can see this ancient archetype of a sacred, guarded bridge reflected with stunning clarity in the fundamental mechanics of CRISPR technology itself. The tool does not work as a single, monolithic entity. It is a complex system, and at its heart is a molecule that acts as the literal bifrost between biological realms. This is the guide RNA, a custom-designed sequence of genetic code. Think of this molecule as the bridge itself. One end of this RNA strand is programmed to recognize and bind to a very specific, unique sequence in the DNA of an organism. This is its anchor in the world of the target, be it a human cell, a plant, or a bacterium. The other end of the strand is designed to firmly attach to the Cas9 protein, the powerful enzymatic scissors that will make the edit. The guide RNA quite literally forms a bridge, a connection between the targeting system and the execution tool, allowing the Cas protein to cross over from its generic state to a precise location in a foreign genetic landscape it would otherwise never find. This act of bridging fundamentally shatters the oldest biological barrier of all, the species boundary. For billions of years, the flow of genetic information was largely vertical, passed down from parent to offspring within a species. Horizontal transfer moving genes between entirely different species was a rare, slow, and random accident of nature, the result of viral infections or other freak events. CRISPR changes this completely. It allows us to deliberately and precisely build a bifrost between any two species we choose. We can now take a gene that creates a natural pesticide from a bacterium and guide it across the bridge into the genome of a corn plant. We can take the gene for human insulin and guide it into the harmless E. coli bacteria in a lab, turning a simple microbe into a tiny, life-saving pharmaceutical factory. This is the modern bifrost in action, enabling a controlled, intentional exchange between the biological realms of plants, animals, and microbes, realms that have been genetically isolated since the dawn of evolution. And just as the original Rainbow Bridge had its guardian in Heimdallr, our modern genetic bifrost requires its own forms of vigilance and control. We are not simply throwing open the gates between species without consequence. The entire field of biosafety is our Heimdallr, tasked with monitoring what crosses these bridges and ensuring that the connections we build do not unleash chaos. Scientists must carefully consider the ecological impact of a gene-edited organism before it is released, listening for the faintest molecular equivalent of a giant's footsteps on the bridge. They must assess the potential for edited genes to spread to wild populations, potentially disrupting delicate ecosystems. This ethical and regulatory oversight is the necessary guardian of our new power, ensuring that the bridges we build serve to create a more harmonious and healthy world, rather than becoming a pathway for a biological Ragnarok. The myth teaches us that connections between worlds are possible, but they are never without risk, and they demand the utmost respect and the most watchful of sentinels. In the shadowy, revered space between the mortal world and the realm of fate sat the Völva, the Norse seeress. More than a mere fortune teller, she was a master interpreter of the invisible threads that wove the past, present, and future into a single, comprehensible tapestry. When a chieftain or a god sought her counsel, she would enter a trance, her consciousness traveling beyond the limits of ordinary perception to access a deeper truth. From this heightened state, she would deliver her prophecies in a poetic, often cryptic language, describing events that had not yet come to pass with an unnerving clarity. Her most famous recitation, preserved in the Völuspá, outlines the entire history of the cosmos from its creation to its destruction and eventual rebirth at Ragnarok. Her power was not to change these events, but to see the patterns that dictated their inevitable unfolding, to perceive the destination of a path that was already being walked. This ancient practice of prophecy finds a direct and powerful counterpart in one of the most transformative applications of modern genetics, polygenic risk scoring. Just as the Völva drew upon ancient wisdom and observable signs to predict a chieftain's fate or a coming famine, scientists can now analyze an individual's unique genetic code to forecast their biological destiny. A polygenic risk score is precisely that, a statistical prophecy. It works by examining not just one single gene, but thousands of tiny variations across a person's entire genome. Each of these variations might contribute only a minuscule amount to the overall risk of developing a particular condition, like heart disease, diabetes, or certain types of cancer. But when combined and calculated together, they generate a powerful predictive score, a numerical glimpse into a person's genetic future. It's a scientific form of scrying, using the crystal ball of DNA to reveal not a fixed, unchangeable doom, but a powerful statistical likelihood, a predisposition written into the very core of one's being. The Völva's visions were never simple, straightforward predictions. They were complex narratives filled with cause and effect. She didn't just see a battle, she saw the broken oath that would lead to it, the specific champion who would fall, and the long-term consequences for the tribe. Similarly, modern genetic forecasting is moving beyond single disease prediction and into the realm of modeling complex biological narratives. Researchers are now using vast datasets and powerful algorithms to create what are called predictive evolutionary models. By analyzing the genetic codes of thousands of people, they can track how certain alleles, versions of genes, are changing in frequency within a population over time. This allows them to make educated forecasts about our species' biological trajectory. They can predict, for instance, if a mutation that confers resistance to a specific disease is likely to become more common in future generations, or how human fertility rates might evolve based on current genetic trends. This is the Völva's vision of Ragnarok applied to biology, seeing the broad, sweeping arcs of change that will define our collective future. Yet the myths also carry a profound warning about the burden of foresight. To see the future is to be burdened with knowledge, and sometimes that knowledge reveals inevitable suffering that cannot be stopped. The Völva in the Völuspá recounts the death of the beloved god Baldur with a tone of sorrowful resignation. She sees the event clearly, but the prophecy itself does not stop it from happening. This echoes a significant ethical dilemma in genetic forecasting. What is the psychological impact of knowing you have a high genetic predisposition for a currently incurable neurodegenerative disease like Alzheimer's? This knowledge can cast a long shadow over a person's life, creating a phenomenon known as genetic fatalism, where an individual feels their future is already written and their choices are meaningless. The prophecy, whether delivered by a seeress or a smartphone app, can become a self-fulfilling doom if it leads to anxiety, depression, or the abandonment of healthy habits because the person feels their fate is already sealed. This is where the ancient role of the Völva transforms from a simple metaphor into a guide for ethical practice. A skilled seeress did not just deliver a raw, terrifying prophecy and send the listener away despairing. She provided context. Her recitations were narratives that often included the causes of the future tragedy and sometimes even hints at possible, though difficult, paths to mitigation. This is the crucial next step for modern genetic prophecy, the move from prediction to interpretation and empowerment. Genetic counseling is the modern equivalent of this interpretive wisdom. A counselor doesn't just hand a patient a report with a high-risk score for breast cancer. They sit with them, explain what the numbers truly mean in terms of absolute risk, and most importantly, outline a clear plan of action. This plan might include earlier and more frequent screenings, preventative medications, or lifestyle changes that can significantly alter the course of that predicted future. The prophecy is not a verdict, it is a map. It doesn't show an unchangeable destination, but rather the terrain ahead, allowing the individual to choose a better path. The Völva's true power was not just in seeing fate, but in providing the context that allowed her listeners to meet their destiny with courage and preparation, a wisdom we are only now beginning to integrate into our own technological mastery of biological foresight. So how do our modern-day rune carvers actually perform this magic? Let's break down CRISPR-Cas9, not with complex jargon, but through the lens of the very myths that predicted it. Think of a cell as a great library, and inside that library is the book of you, your DNA. This book is written in a 4-letter code, and a single typo in this massive volume can lead to a disease. For decades, if we wanted to fix a typo, it was like sending a scribe into the library blindfolded with a bottle of whiteout and a pen. The results were messy, inaccurate, and incredibly risky. CRISPR changes everything. It gives us a pair of reading glasses, a microscopic highlighter, and a precision pencil with an eraser. The system has two main parts. First, there's the guide. This is a custom-made piece of RNA, which you can think of as a magical rune we've designed. This rune isn't random. We craft its sequence to be the perfect mirror image of the exact sentence in the book of DNA that we want to find. If we need to fix the gene that causes sickle cell anemia, we design a rune that will only and exclusively recognize that one specific genetic sequence. This rune then acts like one of Odin's ravens, Hugin or Munin, flying into the vast library of the cell and scanning every bookshelf until it spots its precise target. Once it finds the exact sentence it's programmed to seek, it lands and holds on tight. Now the rune doesn't work alone. Attached to it is the second part, the Cas9 protein. This is the divine instrument, the equivalent of the godly hand that holds the chisel. Cas9 is an enzyme, a tiny molecular machine that acts as a pair of incredibly precise scissors. Once the guide rune has located the exact spot in the genetic code, it signals to the Cas9 scissors, which then swoop in and make a clean, deliberate cut in both strands of the D and a double helix. It snips out the faulty word, the genetic typo, but the process isn't finished with just a cut. The cell, realizing its genetic material has been broken, panics and rushes to repair the damage. Here, we can provide the cell with a new, corrected piece of DNA, a tiny scrap of parchment with the right spelling. The cell's own repair mechanisms will use this provided template to fix the break, seamlessly integrating the new, healthy genetic code into the book. It's the final step in the process. We've not only found the error with our magical rune and cut it out with our divine scissors, but we've also provided the correct text for the cell to copy, effectively rewriting the sentence to be perfect. This is how we move from being passive readers of our genetic fate to becoming active authors, using the runes of RNA and the scissors of Cas9 to edit the very story of life itself. The staggering power to rewrite the code of life places us at a crossroads the Norse gods would find deeply familiar, forcing us to confront ethical dilemmas they wrestled with millennia ago. Their myths are not mere stories of power, but intricate lessons on the profound responsibility that comes with it. Consider the creation of the first humans, Ask and Embla. The gods did not simply will them into existence. They engaged in a deliberate, multi-stage process of engineering, bestowing spirit, reason, and form. This act of creation was not taken lightly. It was a careful, considered investment in a new form of life for which they would become eternally responsible. Their ongoing struggles to protect Asgard, to manage the chaos of Loki, and to ultimately face the consequences of their actions at Ragnarok all stem from this initial creative act. They became stewards of a system they set in motion, a lesson for us as we stand at the dawn of an age where we too can play a role in the fundamental design of future generations. The question is not whether we can become creators, but whether we possess the wisdom to be good stewards of the life we might shape. This Norse perspective fundamentally reframes the modern anxiety over playing God. In the myths, the gods themselves are not infallible, omnipotent beings. They are powerful, yes, but also flawed, passionate, and bound by their own set of rules and prophecies. They are not above the consequences of their actions. Odin's relentless pursuit of wisdom costs him an eye and sets in motion his own fate. Loki's chaotic creativity leads to both miraculous inventions and catastrophic destruction. This nuanced view suggests that the real danger is not in wielding power itself, but in wielding it with the arrogance of a Loki, without foresight, humility, or a respect for the complex web of consequences. The ethical challenge of CRISPR is not that we are reaching for a divine power, but that we are reaching for a profoundly powerful tool without yet having the god-like wisdom to foresee every ripple it will create in the pond of existence. The myths teach us that power and wisdom must be sought together, for one without the other is a path to disaster. We can find a powerful guide for this journey in the Norse concept of ørlög and wyrd, the foundational layers of fate and the active, unfolding manifestation of that destiny. Our genetic code is our biological ørlög, the primal blueprint we inherit. For most of human history, we viewed this as an unchangeable sentence. But CRISPR gives us the ability to reach back and edit that ørlög itself to alter the foundational layers. This is an awe-inspiring responsibility. The myths suggest that while the past sets the stage, the future is not entirely fixed. Our actions in the present, our wyrd, can influence the outcome. This translates to a modern ethical imperative. Our power to edit the genetic past must be exercised with a profound reverence for the future it will create. It is not enough to ask if we can make a change. We must ask what kind of wyrd, what kind of unfolding story we are setting in motion for that individual, their descendants, and the entire ecosystem of which they are a part. Perhaps the most poignant warning from the myths comes from the story of Odin and the runes. His acquisition of ultimate knowledge was not free. It was purchased with immense personal sacrifice and suffering. He understood that true wisdom has a cost. As we unlock the runes of our own genetic code, we must ask ourselves what the price of this knowledge will be. Will it be the erosion of genetic diversity in a rush to eliminate perceived imperfections? Could we inadvertently create a biological monoculture as vulnerable as a field of identical crops to a single new blight? The gods valued strength and courage, but their world was rich with diversity, from the mighty Thor to the cunning Loki to the wise Frigg. They teach us that an ecosystem, whether of a world or a genome, derives its resilience from its variety. Editing our ørlög without valuing this diversity would be a tragic failure of wisdom, a misunderstanding of the very source of life's strength. Ultimately, the Norse myths do not provide easy answers, but they offer a crucial framework for navigating the stormy ethical seas ahead. They remind us that power is inseparable from consequence, that creation is inextricably linked to responsibility, and that the pursuit of knowledge is a journey that demands sacrifice, humility, and an eternal vigilance. The gods were not perfect rulers, but they were engaged rulers, constantly working to stave off chaos and protect their creation, even from their own mistakes. As we grasp the tools to shape life itself, we are called to become not gods, but wise guardians. We must build our own version of Heimdallr's vigilance through rigorous oversight, cultivate Odin's thirst for wisdom through continued research, and remember that every edit we make is a thread we are weaving into the great tapestry of life, a tapestry we are only just beginning to understand how to read. What we have traced here is far more than a collection of curious coincidences. It is a profound resonance across millennia, a conversation between the deepest intuitions of our ancestors and the most cutting-edge revelations of our science. From the vast, connecting branches of Yggdrasil to the intricate helix of DNA, from the fate-weaving Norns to the gene-editing precision of CRISPR, the patterns are too consistent, too layered, to be dismissed as mere fantasy. These ancient storytellers, gazing at the stars and wrestling with the meaning of existence, seem to have charted a map for a journey they could never take, a journey into the very source code of life itself. They gave us a mythological language to describe a technological reality that was thousands of years beyond their grasp, suggesting that the human imagination has always possessed a unique and startling ability to foresee its own destiny. This exploration reveals that our drive to manipulate our own nature is not a modern aberration born of arrogance, but a fundamental, timeless thread in the human story. The Norse myths are not cautionary tales warning us to leave fate alone. They are complex narratives about the inescapable responsibility that comes with power. Odin did not reject the runes because the cost was too high. He accepted the sacrifice because the wisdom was essential. The gods did not leave the first humans as unformed driftwood. They actively engineered them into beings of greater potential. These stories reframe our current ethical dilemmas not as a sudden departure from a natural order, but as the latest chapter in an ancient saga. The saga of a species that has always sought to carve its own destiny, first with symbols and stories, and now with molecules and code. So what do we do with this inherited map? The myths provide no simple answers, but they offer a crucial framework of wisdom. They teach us that true power is always balanced by profound cost, that creation is inextricably linked to consequence, and that the most dangerous force in the universe is not knowledge itself, but knowledge wielded without humility and foresight. As we stand at the threshold of literally rewriting our future, we are called to be not like the chaotic Loki, whose ingenuity often unleashed catastrophe, but like the wise and watchful Heimdallr, guarding the bridge with unwavering vigilance. We must approach our new powers with the depth of understanding that Odin sought and the sense of sacred stewardship that the Norns embodied. Ultimately, this is not just a story about genetics or mythology. It is a story about the human spirit, its boundless curiosity, its relentless drive to push beyond limits, and its eternal quest to find meaning in the patterns of existence. Whether we are telling tales of gods weaving fate around a world tree or writing new instructions into a genome, we are engaged in the same fundamental endeavor, seeking to understand our place in the cosmos and to take an active hand in shaping what we might become. The runes have been decoded, the mead of poetry is ours to brew, and the threads of fate are now in our hands. The great and enduring question left by these ancient seers is not whether we can master these powers, but whether we possess the wisdom to wield them well.